thought for today's project we'd do some traditional flower arranging. So probably out of all the little projects we've been doing over the course of the holidays, this will be the one, if you don't know how to arrange flowers in a very conventional manner, will be the one for you. On to today's arrangement. For this, I have chosen a really big jam jar, and I don't remember what was in here. Possibly pickled onions. The man of the house likes pickled onions. You can see him in the garden there. So I've chosen something quite big because I'm going to be putting quite a few flowers into my jar. And the flowers I've bought are flowers I've come from the supermarket. So most often you see me putting bits and pieces into my vases. I've snippets really that have come from my garden. And then with the white project we had the other day, I had treated myself to a couple of stems from the florist, and those flowers are still going really well. They are fading, and you can see the flowers as they start to die and crinkle. So I've pinched a few more flowers off those, and I'm left with a few more buds and then the really pristine flowers. So today I have been to the supermarket to do a bit of a shop, and I thought I would buy some supermarket flowers to show you how you can arrange those. And in fact, you arrange them exactly the same way you would with any other flower. Now, quite often it's difficult to decide what to buy when you go to the supermarket. I'm going to pinch that head off, it's fallen off. And what I've done to keep things simple, I went for shades of yellows. Actually, I've bought 3 bunches of flowers here. I got 2 for £5. So I saved myself £1. There should have been 6, and then an extra bunch for £3. So I spent £8 on flowers. So it's and it's not a cheap option, but it's much more cost effective than going to the florist, where £8 might have bought you about 4 roses perhaps. So as I say, to keep things simple, I've gone with my yellow flowers because they'll all go together. And that's the difficulty of sometimes when you're putting flowers together that you're seeing in the supermarket. You're trying to work out what goes with what. And sometimes I don't always like the combinations that have been put together with the flowers in the pre-made bunches, and quite often you get the chrysanthemums, multicoloured chrysanthemums in a bunch, and you think, well, I quite like those, but I don't like the others. And I did notice today that there was some dyed chrysanthemums as well, which didn't look very appealing. So I thought I wanted quite a nice look to my flowers, so I will just buy the individual bunches and go from there. So the first thing you need to do when you get your flowers home from the supermarket is to cut off the plastic wrap. So much like you putting your frozen foods away as soon as you get home, and the things that go to the fridge, and then taking your time with the cans and what have you, you need to get your flowers in water as soon as you can really. So I'd take them all out of the plastic wrapping. I would then undo the elastic band, and then you need to recut the stems. So if you look here, the stems are all really dried out, so they're not going to be able to take up water. So I would go through, and I would do this as one bunch and just cut all the way through. But in close up, what I'm doing is I'm cutting the stem at an angle to give it a nice point, and also I've created a greater surface area, if I can get that onto the camera. So can you see that? Not quite sure that's in focus, but you can see there it's on a point, so I've got an oval surface area, where if I cut them straight across, you've just got this pointed section. And where you've got spray carnations, so these are spray carnations or full-size carnations, you'll see that you have these knobbly nodes up the stem, and I would always cut between the node rather than on. This is a point of weakness on the node, and your water won't be taken up quite so well, so always cut between the stems. And then you might even find you've got some side shoots here. You can pull those off, put them in water, and they will root, so you add a bonus there. And then taking off any leaves that will sit below your water. So what I would do as good practice, I would come home, unwrap my flowers, and I tend to put them in a bucket of water before I'm ready to use them. So imagine this is a bucket of water, you've filled it up, and anything, if your water came up this high, anything that was going to sit below that water line, you'd have to make sure there were no leaves and no side shoots in there. Just good practice. because if you kept it like that for a long time, the leaves would start to rot off, and then your water would start to go stinky and green, and then it attracts bacteria and you shorten the life of your flowers. So that is how you would prepare your flowers. So that was my spray carnations. Do the same, exactly the same thing with the roses. Cut those out of their packaging. And then on this packet, we've actually got some flower foods. This says that it's specifically rose flower food. And if you look at the back, it says, add to 1 litre, empty the contents of the sachet into the water, and to cut the stems by 3 centimetres, removing the leaves. So the flower food basically is a syrupy mixture, and it's got a mix of antibacterials and nutrients, and it'll keep your flowers fresher and lasting longer. What I tend to do, because I've also got another bunch of flower food on that wrap, so I've got 2 lots of flower food for 3 bunches of flowers. I tend to put one of these sachets away in my kitchen drawer to use another time, and just use one of the sachets at the moment. So you do find if you save your sachets, you'll end up with loads and loads of them. So just take care with them, because as the plastic degrades, you know, if you accidentally nicked the plastic wrapper, they leak really easily, and you end up with a gloopy mass in the bottom of your drawer, which isn't very nice. So with the roses, these have been tied up twice. I don't quite know why, but quite often you see this. I think this must be the grower. There's just elastic band there, and then another elastic, which I can actually, if I take it off, I can again put it in my drawer and reuse that for my next flower arranging project or jam making or whatever else you want to do. So here with the roses, you've got quite a lot of side shoots to take off. So I would pinch them off, and the only the issue here is sometimes when you pinch the side shoots off, rather than pinching, I was going to try and pull. But sometimes you end up, when you pull the leaf off, it sort of creates a wound, and if you can sort of see that's going to happen, I would go through and trim the leaves off with a pair of scissors. But it's much quicker to be able to do this. My roses haven't got any thorns, and you'd prepare them exactly the same way. So you can see again the end is really dried up, and you would recut the stem at an angle, and that reveals all the lovely freshness, and that stem is ready to take up water. And then the last of the flowers that I bought were alstroemeria. So again, I'm cutting away the little plastic tie, trimming away the cellophane, making sure I'm not damaging the flowers as I go up there. And these are on long straight stems, and what I tend to do here, you've got the buds and the flowers at the top with a few leaves, and then you've got random leaves at the bottom which come off quite easily. And I tend to stroke them down and get rid of those. And whereas with the other flowers, I take off what comes below the waterline, I do think with the alstroemeria, it's nice having the straight stems, and then everything's happening at the top. So I do tend to take everything off the bottom of those, and again, it's all dried up bottom. Give it a fresh cut, nice point, and I can feel that moistness on my finger, so I know I've got through to fresh growth. And you might have noticed that one of the buds of the alstroemeria pinged off, and it's just a matter of, these things happen, just being careful with your flowers, not throwing them around too much. And also when you're buying your flowers, particularly when you're buying your roses, and you think, oh, that looks great, and then sometimes you get home and you'll pick out one of the stems and it'll just be a stem with no flower head. So you should really count, if you're concerned about value for money, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. There's 10 heads there. So normally flowers are sold in 10s. The roses are sold in 10s. I've got 5 stems of alstroemeria and just a bunch of the spray carnations. So just make sure you are getting what you pay for. So that would be, imagine I've put those all in water and they're all waiting for me to use. Now it's not so important to cut your flowers and rest them before you start arranging. If you're only arranging in water, it's probably more important to see what florists and flower arrangers call conditioning, which is looking after your flowers before you arrange them, if you were going to be using flower foam, and that's that green, spongy, water retaining material, because the flowers don't take up water so well from the flower foam. But when you're arranging in fresh water, as we have done for all our projects, they are in water, and therefore it's not so vital that you give them a long drink before you actually arrange them, because you're arranging and conditioning in one. And to save myself time, that I have demonstrated what I'm doing, but I've just left my flowers straight on the table, and it will be when I come to cut them down to length that they'll actually start to sit in the water. Obviously, if you knew you weren't going to do your flower arranging straight away, it would be best, yeah, just to recut the stems and plonk them into any old vase or a bucket, and then come back when you've got more time to arrange them in a more appealing way. So as with all flower arranging, you end up with lots of rubbish, and I've got a compost bin to the side of me, so I will put that in our bin ready for collection. Or you might have a compost heap at home that you could put that straight in the compost heap. And I did say in the description I was going to show you how to make a flower frog using vines. So these aren't actually vines, these are my trusty silver birch twigs. But if later in the year you're doing pruning, so perhaps you've got a Virginia creeper that's going up the side of the house, or a wisteria or a clematis, and you're coming to cut it back for the winter, instead of just ditching all the cuttings and putting them on the compost heap, you could use them in the way I'm going to use my silver birch, to create a natural frog which sits inside your jam jar or your vase, which will help support your flowers and keep them in place. So quite a large jam jar today, and with my silver birch twigs, these are the ones I cut a few weeks ago, and if you remember, I used the twigs because they were nice and pliable when I decorated a vase with leaves on the edge. I tied my silver birch to make a belt to hold everything in place. So even though I've cut them a while ago, they are still quite flexible. And that's what we're looking for, something that has got a bit of movement, so that when you come to curve it round, it's not going to snap and break. And as I said before, this could be the beginning of a Christmas door wreath, a nice woody door wreath to hang up later on in the year. I shall prepare the other stems in the same way. You need them to be reasonably long. This one's probably only 30 centimetres. If they're too short, you're going to find it difficult to work with them. But they don't need to be incredibly long, just long enough to be able to perhaps to wrap around your fingers a couple of times. I'm making one complete circle there and a bit left over. This one here is probably too short to use. It's probably 20 centimetres. It's a bit short. I will take the leaves off just in case I do need to use it. And my last one here. So I've got my jam jar. I'm just going to tidy up my stems, because when I cut them off the tree, well, I think I probably pulled them off rather than cutting them. So I'm just going to give it a clean cut, so I get rid of all this messy stuff at the top here, just so it's nice and neat. And then taking all the stems in my hand, oops, got this other one here needs trimming away. I'm going to wrap them round, as I've shown you before, round and round and round in my hand, like that. And then with my jar, just thread them down inside. I'm itching a slight bit because those dried leaves have just gone down my top. So I'm pushing them into the mouth of my jar and then spreading them out a little bit. So they are acting as a natural frog, and when we say frog, it's just a means of supporting your flowers. It's something in near water, and it will support your flowers. So that looks quite attractive on its own. You could imagine at Christmas adapting this and perhaps having some lovely twigs in a jar, and then some of those battery operated fairy lights wrapped in there as well, so you don't even need any flowers. And then with my jug of water at the side here, I'm filling this up quite high, and even at this stage it looks pretty as well. There's something about the water, it magnifies what you've got in your jar, and all these little air bubbles are starting to attach themselves to the twigs. So my twigs were quite dry when I put them in water. If you're using fresher twigs, it goes against everything I've just said about trimming everything off below the waterline. So it's one of these things where trial and error. With my dry twigs, they will be a lot more stable and not going to rot as quickly as fresh twigs do. So if you discover that you're using fresh twigs and the water's starting to go murky, that'll be because the twigs were starting to rot down and sending your water off, attracting bacteria, and your water is starting to discolour. So if something looks really, really attractive like this, but long term you may just need to keep an eye on it, and if it looks like things are starting to rot and you'll get a really horrible smell in your vase, that would be the time to tip your water away and just freshen everything up a little bit. I'm getting some of the leftover leaves rising to the surface a little bit here. Again, as I say, that looks really quite attractive with nothing in it at all. So arranging my flowers, not only did I buy the 3s in the yellows, but I've also bought them specifically because they're having a different job. My roses are what I call my wow flower. They're the flower that you immediately notice, your eye is going to be drawn to. I've then got my wispy flowers. These are the much smaller buds. So you would normally expect to see the focal flower in the middle of your arrangement and the buds off towards the outer edge. And then my alstroemerias act as the in-betweeny flowers. So they're not as big as the wow flower, the eye-catching flower, but they are bigger than the little buds. And it's something that they are in between because you've got your focal, you've got your, what a florist would call your transitional, I'm calling them my in-betweeny sized flowers, and then your buds at the end. So whatever flowers you decide to use, just think about your 3s. What is your wow flower, what's your tiny flower, and what's your flower that will fit in between them, so you're not having a vase full of big roses and then little delicate buds, because it would all look a bit unbalanced. You want something that harmonises, so it's small, medium and large. Now what I'm going to do is start with my in-betweeny flowers, and the reason I'm doing this in particular is because my alstroemeria, as we've already talked about, have long straight stems and then these heads that are full of leaves and flowers. So just by putting a few stems in the water, it's really going to give me a really full appearance. And I'm not using any greenery in my arrangement today, partly because I don't have much in my garden at the moment, but I thought it'd be interesting to see. It may be that you don't have a garden, perhaps you've just got a window box, and when you go to the supermarket, you want to be able to get these flowers to work for you. I'm pulling off some of these leaves at the bottom because they're looking a bit bedraggled. So again, it's useful to think about how each of these flowers can be used and what their role is. So we need to cut the flowers to length. So my preferred way of doing this is to move the jar to the edge of the table, and then my stem falls down next to the table, and there I can gauge how long to cut my flowers or how short to cut them, and recut them at an angle. And you'll be able to see that, say you only had a few flowers, say you just decided to buy roses one day and you thought your roses would fall around. Sometimes when the mouth of the vase is too open, everything falls to a side. But because you've put this frog in, you can get the flowers to sit where you want them to. So that alstroemeria is sitting straight upright because I wove it through some of the stems at the top and some of these silver birch twigs at the bottom, so it stays exactly where I want it to. So you can imagine, perhaps you had some gerbera or a really gorgeous rose, you could have that standing up. Adjust again. Have that standing up just to attention. It looks really great. That's a bit stiff for what I'm trying to do. So I will release it and put it in at a slight angle. So I'm aiming it in, I don't know, 45-degree angle. I'm looking for everything to be very natural and splaying out. And in traditional flower arranging, we talk about having a sort of natural centre to your vase. Measure that up again. This time, putting one stem there. I'm going to start off with 3 stems. After a while, you'll get your eye in as to how long you need to cut them. So I've put 3 stems in already. So imagine the points of a triangle. 1, 2, 3. So I've got 3 flower heads in there. I'll try and show you that. There. I don't want my water to tip out. So it's a good starting point. I've created a wigwam with 3 flowers. I have got some more flowers, so I'll put one in the middle. And because I don't want to overload my vase, possibly the 5th stem I might just keep for something else, and I could have that in a vase on its own. So you can see just with those 4 stems, it's creating a really lovely arrangement. In fact, that first stem I put in is a bit longer than everyone else. I'm going to recut. So you've got that option as well. You don't have to keep things as they are. You can come back and just gently pull them out and put them back in again. So that could be a beautiful arrangement, 4 flowers in a vase with this added interest of your stems at the bottom. So now I've chosen my bushy alstroemeria because they were creating this really full head, and they then will be able to support the other flowers I put in. So I come back in with my roses and they will stay where I want them to be. So I'll go through and pinch off the leaves. And with my roses, I'll probably just keep 1 leaf at the top because you've got lots of green going on here. You don't need lots of these rose leaves, and they don't really last very well. They look a bit bedraggled after a while. So because my roses are the wow flower and the flower I want to show off, I'm going to measure up again, but I want the roses to be slightly higher than the alstroemeria so they show. If you cut them down too short, they'll be hidden, and your prized flower, your focal flower, will be lost in the general bushiness of your stem. So this one here, I'm going to aim straight for the middle and weave it down. And see here, I am rotating the flower head slightly, corkscrewing it down into the vase. So I've got that one to sit centrally right up there. And then I've got lots of flowers here. So I'm going to start with putting my 3 in again to create that triangle. And measure it up. So I don't need to think too hard about where to put my flowers because one of the alstroemeria is there and the other one's here. I'm just going to aim at the edge there. I'm going to cut that a tiny bit shorter. As long as the flower is in water, it doesn't need to be right the way down to the bottom of your vase. So that rose I've just put in, the stem stops there. If you aim everything down into the middle of the vase, everything just sits straight up, and I'm trying to get a gentle curve. So that's why I cut that one slightly shorter. And then here, I've got 2 more alstroemeria. So I position my next rose in between those 2, remembering to measure it up for approximate length, and then I'm going a tiny bit shorter. So pushing it through, and I'm going to aiming at about 45 degrees. Not precise, but I'm not pushing it straight down. Trying to get a bit of an angle on it, and if it's knocking into other stems, giving it a bit of a twist. That one is sitting down there. It was catching on my silver birch. Let's see if I can get it the other way around. That looks good. And then back round to the beginning, my next 2 alstroemeria, I can put my next rose in the middle. Again, pinch off the flower stems, the leaves. Measure up, that's the bottom of the vase, but I want it to go a bit shorter, so I'm going to come up a couple of centimetres higher and recut the stem. So at the moment I have got 4 alstroemeria, 4 roses, and they've all got the same pattern. 1 flower in the middle and then 3 around the outside edge. So you can see rose 1, rose 2, which you can't see so well, and rose 3. Now I've got 10 roses in my pack and it seems a shame not to use them. So what I could do is make another triangle going the other way. And then I'll have 6 flowers around the edge. So this is pretty much going in where the alstroemeria is going in. I'm cutting it quite a bit shorter. You can see here that the rose head, that's the rim of my vase, it's only just above the rim of the vase. And that's another way of adding interest to your flowers, is to cut them to different lengths. And I can weave them gently. So that was the first 2 roses I put in. Round 1 was that one, and round those 2. And then coming in with my second triangle, it's gone much lower. If you cut them all at the same height, there will just be like a little halo, a circle going around the vase, and it keeps everything a bit too stiff. You want it to be a bit freer. So come around again, and now I know I need to put another rose between these 2 roses, and I want it to just sit a little bit above the edge of the rim of the vase. So there's my rim of the vase. And if I measure up with this rose here, I'm cutting it practically in half. So I've paid all that money for a long stem and cut it in half. And I'm just poking it through those 2 alstroemerias, just so you can see it. Next one round, these are my 2 roses here. So I know I want a lower rose in the centre there. Measure up, I'm going to aim for it just above the rim of the jar, and I'm holding it with a stem, so I'm never holding it with the flower head. It's very delicate. You want to be holding it really as if you were holding a pencil, and push that in. As long as the flower stems are in water, see, that was quite short, that stem. It's gone in here and I can see the stem here. I just need to keep an eye over the next few days that I've got enough water in my vase, and if I haven't, I would just push the flowers to one side and then get a jug or put the tap down there, or one of those sports water bottles, and let it rest down in there. So again, a very natural, pleasing looking arrangement. The thing that bothers me here, I don't know if you can see it, I've got a really tall leaf just there, and what I'm going to do is cut it out. I want the rose to be the show off, and not that rose, not the leaf. So you can just go back in and pinch things, and in arranging again, I have broken one of the alstroemeria stems, but that would be perfect for putting into one of my smaller jam jars. So don't throw any of those bits away, because you can use them again. So step 2 is again a very pleasing arrangement. I could either have had the arrangement just full of the alstroemeria, I could have had it with just the alstroemeria and the roses, but I want to add in that extra element, which is the spray carnations. And for those, I'm just going to dot them around. So where I see a gap, I'm going to have some higher up and some a bit lower down, and making it look really natural. So pulling off the side shoots and being quite delicate, because the spray carnations can be quite brittle with these node points. They snap quite easily. So just, without rushing, recut the stems, hold like a pencil. So you can just see the little bud there, and it's a nice contrast against the colourful rose, but you can see what I meant about having something big, something middle-sized, and something tiny as well, and just adds to the flow. And I'll go around quite methodically around the edge of the vase. Here there's a stem with no flower on it, so I can get rid of that. Cutting between the nodes, choosing my next place, so they've gone quite low. And here I've got a stem that's sort of split into 2. What I might do is, this is the main stem here, I might cut there and have a little short stem, and then have that bud on the longer original stem. So don't automatically cut everything the same length straight off, because you might want some longer pieces. That's and there, and then that long stem, recut the stem, and I can put that towards the middle a bit more, so I'm coming up a bit higher. So flowers on the edge, and then they're as if they're climbing up into the centre of the arrangement. And there's another shoot that I could plant up. So these ones are going a bit taller towards the middle. And as you add more and more flowers in, the jam jar is becoming more and more congested. So you might need to wiggle things around a bit, or be prepared perhaps to make a second jam jar. And also to make sure, I've just misfired when I put this flower in, make sure your flowers are going into the jar. Sometimes you think, oh, I've got a beautiful arrangement, and you discover that the stems poked out around the back and they're not in water. Recut, take off any green leaves that will be in the water. And of course you can see now that you don't need any green in your vase to fill it out, because the natural greenery on the flowers is adding a bit of oomph. But if you had a garden that was full of flowers, by all means, full of greenery, do use it, because it'll mean buying less flowers. So you could have your own greenery and then supplement it with just a few choicer stems, and that might be when you decide to go to your florist, that you think, well, I don't need much to put in my vase, and you might think, well, if I've got £5 or £8 to spend, I might just spend it on a couple more unusual flowers rather than the more ordinary flowers that you get at the supermarket. So the supermarket, depending on where you are, normally has staples of roses and chrysanthemums and carnations. So spinning that round, I think I've probably got enough in that arrangement. So you can see I've got a mixture of stems in here and the original bits of silver birch or vine that you might want to put in. You might not think that looks particularly attractive now with all those stems in there, but you could make up the arrangement in one of your decorated jars where you couldn't see, it's an opaque edge to it. So it's up to you how you do it, but it's just really easier for me to show you in a very clear vase, and then you can understand what's going on in the water. So creating a thing of beauty in the water, and then looking at the lovely flower heads as well. Now, when I've come to finish my arrangement, I've got no more flowers I can fit in, but I am left with 3 stems of the spray carnation, 1 stem of the alstroemeria, and 3 stems of the roses. So that would be plenty to make up a smaller jam jar arrangement. You can see by splitting them down and arranging them more artistically, it just looks more interesting than having them in a vase just like that when they're all at the same level. You're trying to get something at the top and having flowers coming around the edge, because in all likelihood these flowers will be sitting on your table or on a shelf, and you'll be looking at them sideways on. You don't want everything, all the flowers just across the top, and then all you can see is the green edges of the flowers. They look beautiful from above, but you do want to see them in their side view as well. So I hope you've enjoyed that, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what flowers you come up with and what you decide to buy, and how you're going to arrange them. So you could, now we're coming to the end of the course, arrange your flowers in this kind of way, but do it in one of the vases you've created earlier in the course. So you don't need to treat each individual project as a standalone activity. You could mix and match the elements and make your arrangement look even more personal to you. I thought you might like to see how my flowers have been doing over the last few days. So you remember that I put the roses in to make them really eye-catching, set down low, so I got the rose there and then sort of interspersed and caught your eye over the rest of the jar. And you can see how the alstroemeria have opened out now, and actually they're starting to look a bit taller than the rest of the flowers. So whereas the roses were higher because I wanted them to show up more, now the alstroemeria's opened, the roses have, they've been dominated really by the alstroemeria, and then the little spray carnations. Some of them are opened and some of them haven't, and you'll find that with the spray carnations that sometimes these really tight buds just never really open. But what I wanted to show you in particular was the water. You remember I'm always telling you to strip off any leaves or fresh greenery that's going to be in the vase of water below the waterline. And you can see if I hold that up, it's gone ever so slightly murky, and that will be a byproduct of just the ageing water. It's been there a few days, but also because I've had the twigs underwater as well. So what I should really do is tip that water away. If I find myself something to pour the water into, tip the water away. And if I was at the kitchen sink, I would probably push the water in there and throw it around. But I'm sitting out in the garden, so I can't do much about it. So nice clean vase again, and then to put in some fresh water. So I've got fresh water here in another jug, and easy enough to do. If you hold the flowers and sort of push them over to one side, and then you'll be able to put your fresh water in. Making sure you put enough water in that it catches all the stems. So some of these stems, because I was trying to get the arrangement to splay out and be nice and rounded, don't always go to the bottom of the vase. There's one here, for instance, I can see. It's right up near the top, so I need to make sure that's enough water. And you can see straight away that that's much cleaner, and I'll just have to keep tabs on that and refresh as needs to be over the next few days. Now, there's a couple of things I've noticed in this vase, that not only have my alstroemeria grown up higher and covering my roses, but this rose here, for instance, if I can twist it and pull it out, and you can see as I've started to pull that out, the petals have started to come off. Oops, come on, Mr. Rose. There we go. I could see that it was starting to go brown. And you can see there the whole flower is just coming apart. So you might need to do a bit of housekeeping and come through. And there's another one here. Rose has got a dark petal on, so I'll just pinch it off. Now, once you start pinching petals off, you're weakening the structure of the rose. So I would say that the flowers aren't going to last forever. So I've had these about 5 days now. So they're doing okay, but you just want to make sure that that you freshen them up a little bit. And possibly what this rose here, you see the rose is beginning to nod over, so I could put that back into the vase and just try and get another flower to support it. Or I could recut the end and plunge it into some really hot water for a few seconds and then back in the vase, and the shock of the hot water can lift the flower head back up again. But really, once your flowers are sort of 5 days old, they are coming to the end of their life. But what I might do, just to keep the vase going a little bit longer, is cut the alstroemeria down a bit. So if I cut a couple of centimetres off the end of the alstroemeria and get them to sit back down into the vase, they won't be so dominant. They won't take over the roses, because I still want the roses to shine. So you will find that over the days that your vase of flowers will change. So you can go back in. And it makes it, you can see that side there I've altered, and this one is still quite high over here. So you don't have to accept your flowers as they grow, as they develop and mature. You can always be cutting them down and changing your arrangement. And that just looks a tiny bit neater. So it won't be so obvious that it's coming to the end of its life.